Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are talking when the Imperium found Vulkan, Primarch of the Salamanders. Spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k story The Hunt for Vulkan by author David Annandale. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, one of the great things about loving 40k in this day and age is living in a time when Primarch returns are possible. Not only possible, but happening. Before our very eyes, these names of myth and legend have returned. While it at one time felt inconceivable we'd ever even see traitor Primarchs on the tabletop at one time, the loyal sons were something else entirely. Something so impossible it didn't even bear thinking about. Yet they did return. Not only the traitors, but now the loyal Primarchs too. Or at least they have begun to. It began with Guilliman, his resurrection and removal from stasis, a beyond momentous event. A universe-altering moment, the understatement of the year. The century, really, where 40k is concerned. Because the return of Guilliman changed everything. A living, breathing son of the Emperor, a Primarch, had returned. But as monumental and defining as that was, in truth it wasn't the first time that this had happened. For a loyal Primarch had indeed returned to the Imperium before. 1500 years in fact, after the heresy. Then, during the War of the Beast, the Imperium was buckling under the assault of the Orcs across the galaxy. For the first time since their empire had been shattered by the Emperor, the Orcs had arose in force. A force completely unprecedented and unexpected. From Ultramar to the Throne World, every inch of the Imperium was struggling. The High Lords were as inept and useless as we've come to expect, and it was only through Rogal Dorn's Last Wall protocol that the Throne World was spared destruction. The Imperial Fist chapter and their successors coming together and combining their might, essentially reforming a de facto legion beneath the command of the last surviving Imperial Fist, Chapter Master Corland. And it was at this time, with Terra temporarily spared destruction, that Corland discovered the home of this Orc tide. The location of its apparent leader, the Beast, was the ancient Orc home of Ulanor. And so Corland sent out a call to his fellow first founding chapters across the galaxy. The Ultramarines of Guilliman, the Dark Angels of Lion L. Johnson, the Blood Angels of Sanguinius, and the Space Wolves of Lehman Russ, for them all to come to Terra, whereupon they would lead a combined assault against the Orc stronghold, a second crusade against Ulanor. However, Corland rightly doubted that he would be able to lead such an assembled force, that his cousin bloodlines would not accept his leadership. However, a solution came from the Inquisition of all places, who had a name in mind, a figure who could all too well lead such an assembled force of Astartes, who could absolutely secure the respect and following across every bloodline, without doubt. Vulkan, the Lord of Drakes, Primarch of the Salamanders. How the Inquisition knew Vulkan was still alive, how they knew where Vulkan was, are questions we still need answers to. It's quite possible they had approached him previously, as they were aware of his oath to protect the world of Caldera. However, regardless of how, they knew, and that was enough. And so Corland and a task force set off for the world, finding it embattled with orcs as everywhere else. The space ahead of the last wall was clear, surrounded by bodies, lit by the flames of the burning tank. The legend was there. Time stuttered. Corlin's senses grappled with awe. His existence before his transformation into a space marine was a blank. The history of that earlier being was lost. So now, for the first time in his memory, he experienced what an unenhanced mortal felt at the sight of the Adeptus Astartes. Vulkan was a colossus, more pillar than man. He was an icon carved of granite and night, immovable as a mountain, ferocious as lava. The deep green of his armour's scales made him a reptile sprung from the dreams and fears of humanity's past. The forged flames of its design made him the fire of a planet's core. The skull of one beast adorned his shoulder guard. His cloak was the hide of another. He was a slayer of myth, and he was myth incarnate. His massive hammer pulsed and crackled with energy. Corlin could not imagine lifting it, never mind wielding it. He found it even more impossible to picture anything, be it orc, void ship or world, that could survive its strike. It was all Corlin could not do to fall to his knees. He was not alone. He was surrounded by the stunned immobility of his battle brothers. They did not forget their training and leave themselves vulnerable to the enemy. They were frozen for the space of a single intake of breath, and the orcs in their vicinity that still lived were incapacitated for much longer. But oh, the time of that breath stretched to infinity. Though Corland had witnessed the moon open its jaws and roar, it was only now that he felt the true touch of the sublime. A breath, and his life was in a point of culmination. His existence was already divided into two by the destruction of the Imperial fists. Now it broke in two again. This time, the far side of the crevice was filled with the fiery light of glory. The breath, and then war. No words passed between Vulkan and the last wall. They would come later. Now there was the necessity of battle. Corland looked up at the Drake helm and the infernal red of its lenses. Vulkan inclined his head in a nod. Then destruction came to the foothills of Caldera once more. One of the moments you never expect a Space Marine to have, but a moment we've all had ourselves, where a split second feels like an eternity. For us, most likely more a moment of adrenaline, reaction, or even fear. But for a Space Marine, it takes meeting a Primarch. And not just meeting a Primarch, but literally laying eyes on a piece of history. A figure you would never ever expect to see. A name from a long gone glorious age. And you can feel the weight of the moment hitting Corland like a truck. That instantaneous, overwhelming awe. The time of that breath stretched to infinity. Though Corland had witnessed the moon open its jaws and roar, it was only now that he felt the true touch of the sublime. Considering everything Space Marines live through, fight through, Corland experiencing the loss of his entire chapter, the teleportation of an entire moon over Terra, and yet it's the mere sight of Vulkan, the mere sight of him, that just takes his breath away. And it's all the more impressive when you know that this isn't Corland's gene father, Rogal. There's no tie of blood there, no screaming fealty, just the magnificence of a Primarch, the genetics of the Emperor himself, and the marvel of his creation. Vulkan here taking on an entire army of orcs pretty much by himself, taking out an entire tank with a single blow of his hammer. A single blow, still possessing all the might he ever had. And you have to wonder what's going through the Primarch's mind in that moment, confronted by an ensemble of the Sons of Dorn, amid the carnage of the battlefield, on a world where he'd left the Astartes and powers of the Imperium behind, centuries upon centuries ago. But he doesn't rage, he doesn't demand, he simply gives them a nod and gets on with the war. There's clearly a respect at the sight of his brother's sons. And together with the arrival of the 20 Space Marines, they would set about defeating this particular force of orcs, where in the aftermath of the battle, the Primarch could finally speak to his new arrivals. He removed his helm. His face was as dark as obsidian, hard as granite, noble as marble. His eyes were black with an anger more ferocious than the snarl of his helm. But when they turned to Corland and the last wall, the anger was not for them. They were curious and wary. Corland bowed low and dropped to one knee. So did all the brothers of the last wall. "Rise," Vulkan said, his voice deep as mountain roots. "I see the insignia of the 7th Legion." He paused, frowning as if confused by the sight of the gathered warriors. Then he blinked. The frown passed as if the question had evaporated. "You are honoured, Sons of Dorn," he said. Corland stood. "I thank you for joining me in this struggle," said Vulkan, "though I don't imagine your presence is a coincidence." "No, Lord Vulkan," Corland answered. "We came in search of you." Vulkan cocked his head. "And you knew where to find me? I wonder how." "Inquisitor Laston Veritas told us where to look." Veritas. Vulkan spoke the name slowly. "I see." He looked thoughtful, not puzzled. "The Imperium has need of you, Lord Vulkan." "Does it?" the Primarch grunted. "I'm sure that is the belief." He raised his head, looking skywards as if he could see the stars. "I am doubtful. There will come a time when I must return." His voice was hollow. "There will come a war. This is not that time. Or that war." You have to wonder here what Vulkan means by that. For me, it's surely a reference to that future war, the one foreseen by the Emperor, when the fight back against chaos truly begins. The war 40k is having right now. And if Vulkan is indeed referring to that, it surely implies that he must know of it thanks to the Emperor. For how else could he? And indeed, how will he know it's the time to return anyway? Unless he receives a sign from his father. Of course, he could be referring to the finding of his artifacts left behind by his sons, the ones they believe, once found, will herald his return. But I'm not sure how that relates to a specific war that Vulkan knows he would have to return for. So for me, I'm far more inclined to believe that it has to be some reference to his father. However, you can definitely feel a little weariness in Vulkan's voice when it comes to the Imperium. Obviously not the simple populace that he's defending here, but maybe more the official side of the Empire. Almost like he feels they've leaned on the Primarchs and the Emperor too much, that they have to learn to stand on their own. However, regardless, their conversation would continue. Corland informing Vulkan of the dire situation the Imperium is facing, Terra itself having an Orc attack moon in its orbit, and how the Orcs have risen from Ulanor once again. "Now they have returned," Corland said, "and threatened to destroy the Emperor's work." Vulkan turned his attention to the other Space Marines. "Tell me who you are." "We are the Last Wall," Eternity said. "We answered the call of Chapter Master Corland. Terror will not fall on our watch, and the Imperial fists will not vanish." "So," Vulkan said to Corland, "you maintain your charge, and rebuild that which has been shattered. I know your burden." He nodded to himself. "So, tell me what you wish of me. Other chapters are gathering on Terra as we speak. Lead us all to Ulanor. Under your command, we will destroy the beast." He gestured to the Thunderhawks coming in to land. "We can depart immediately." "No," said Vulkan. Corland tried to articulate a response. He had imagined not finding Vulkan. He had been forced to imagine the possibility of another defeat. He had not imagined the Primarch's refusal. His awe began to give way to anger. Vulkan spoke again before Corland could retort. "Not now," he said. "I accept Terra's need. I will never turn from my duty to my father. But my duty is here too." I love Vulkan. In one breath he showcases his duty to the people, the Imperium as a whole, by refusing to come to Terra. And yet he reaffirms his duty to his father at the same time. There's honestly no Primarch quite like Vulkan. What he's saying here, as he reaffirms to Corland after this, is that the Imperium can't be saved by abandoning parts of it, by picking and choosing which worlds can fall. To do that is to lose what makes humanity human. How appalled Vulkan would be by the Imperium now, where worlds and populations are given over to the enemy freely. No Primarch symbolises the purity of the Imperium, of what it should be, more than Vulkan. Not even Guilliman, not even the Angel. It was why, as the Emperor said himself, it had to be Vulkan who held the responsibility of the Talisman of Seven Hammers, the doomsday device for the Golden Throne, because only he could truly appreciate the cost. Although Vulkan has been removed from the Imperium for over 1,000 years at this point, you can see how easily he reverts and assumes that mantle of leadership. How easily he imparts a moral lesson onto the Astartes before him, getting them to realise that Caldera must be saved, for the Imperium to truly win, all by a simple no. And you can't help but feel how much the Imperium has lost with the Primarch's departures. Not simply in their battle and tactical prowess, but in their wisdom. For sure, they were made to be more powerful than anyone else, in every way. But they were also very intentionally made to be human too. And their sons, as great and powerful as they are, can't quite think the same way. However, so it was, the Imperium found Vulkan, the Lord of Drakes, and after Caldera was saved, he returned to Terra. And we'll discuss that one next time. But as always everyone, what do you think? Are you surprised the Inquisition knew where a Primarch was, but didn't do anything about it? Could they know of other Primarch locations in the current Imperium? Or do you think, given the circumstances, they would have told Guilliman by now? Do you feel the sense of respect given from Vulkan to the Sons of Dorn here? Greeting them with a simple nod, not being angered or outraged by their arrival. And is this a sign of respect that Vulkan had for his brother Rogal? And of all the Primarchs the Imperium needs now, Is this one scene the perfect highlight of why it needs Vulkan the most? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.